Welcome to our podcast series on diversity and inclusion, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading independent professional body dedicated to promoting best practice and raising the standards of coaching worldwide. I'm Dr. Alexandra Morgan, Senior Lecturer and Coach Educator. In this series, we're privileged to be talking to a superb range of coaches and consultants whose work is making a significant contribution to advancing diversity and inclusion in society and in the coaching profession. We hope this series sparks curiosity and encourages change. Welcome back to part 2 of our podcast on belonging, and also welcome back to Adrian, Mark and Stacie. Just want to turn to Mark now, because Mark, you mentioned your research earlier. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, we did a lot of qualitative interviews, and we also did some quantitative research to look at the breakdown of who feels they belong and who doesn't, and how it's different among different groups. I mean, the qualitative research was particularly fascinating because everyone's in a different place right now. I think, to Stacie's point, everybody's learning stuff. Maybe not everybody, but a large number of people are learning stuff and having to learn it quite quickly, and everyone's at a slightly different place. And we do get that sense that, equality feels like oppression to the formerly privileged. We do get everyone is kind of, it's not so much about where they are, but about which direction am I moving in, or what's going on like that. So there's a very, very wide range of opinions. There is a hesitancy to say anything too much and a fear of making mistakes. And it's just been a fascinating journey. First of all, doing the research for the book, writing the book, talking to, I think it's about 50 different companies about the book, and getting the questions and feedback from different groups of people, and seeing that in some senses things are changing incredibly fast. Easy for me to say from my position. Some things changing incredibly fast, some things not really changing at all. There was picking up Stacie's point, there was a really interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal a year after George Floyd's murder, where they looked at the $50 billion that American companies pledged to, and they said, well, first of all, 45 billion of them were loans and grants that they would make a profit on. So it wasn't like, we're donating to a good cause here. And the figure, and this is out of date now, and I don't hold me to it, but it was something like 1.7 billion had actually processed through the system out of that 50 billion. So you're like, oh, well, a lot of companies got some very lovely headlines out of that, didn't they? And the benefit hasn't necessarily gone through. And I'm not an expert on exactly who's done what and who's spent what. I think it's just a general point that reality hasn't quite matched up to the immediate response of that situation. So, some people moving very fast, some people not moving at all, and therefore quite a lot of friction, I think.
And the organisations, I assume it was within organisations, was it the way you did your research?
Yeah, with individuals in lots and lots of different companies, and the quantitative research was statistically significant and nationally representative, done by a company called Donata. But I shouldn't say this, but my favourite statistic is not one of ours. It comes from it's either one of the McKinsey reports or one of the Deloitte reports. I'm not good at my sources, am I? But the statistic is that 46% of straight white men cover at work. And that's the thing that I always come back to. So this is the group of people who ought to feel that they fit in, really, because that's who, has most of the positions of power and privilege and status. And almost half of them cover at work. They do not feel they can bring their whole selves to work. So
okay,
yeah,
and that's what you mean by cover, is that they're not their authentic selves.
Yeah, they hide some aspect of their personality deliberately at work because they think it would not fit in with or be accepted by their corporate culture. So that's fascinating, because you've got this group of people. It's like the old Aristotle thing of all dogs are animals, but not all animals are dogs. The majority of people in positions of power, status and privilege are straight white men, but not all straight white men are in positions of power, privilege and status, and they don't all feel that they're in that inner circle or that privileged group, and they would like the corporate world to change. And they are eager for the changes that are going on that are being driven by other groups, but that they think they will benefit from too. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. And I think it means that if you are in a meeting at work and somebody is behaving or saying something inappropriately and you are wanting to call it out and worried that you will be very much in the minority if you call it out, I think there is likely to be more support for you in that room than you think there is. And I am quite prepared for anyone else on the call to say I'm being naive and optimistic when I say that, but I think that's true.
Mm. And what that occurs to me then is, how utterly intangible this issue of culture and corporate culture is, that somehow corporate culture is generated, and it's generated by some folks who behave in a certain way, who believe a certain thing, who have a certain set of values, and it pervades, doesn't it? And this is the thing that, we're talking about belonging here. This is the thing that we either decide whether we can belong to it, buy into it, work with it or survive it, or, whatever our way of going about it is, or not. Yeah. And yet it's so intangible that, as you've said, Mark, those that us perhaps who feel more on the outside, those that we think are kind of in it, they also don't feel part of it necessarily. And, this is quite an eye-opener for me in this conversation. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know where I'm going with this thought. It's just one of those thoughts that where you just, your mind suddenly explodes and you realise that it's like, where the hell does this thing that we call corporate culture come from if it's so utterly intangible?
Mark, that is a interesting point.
I mean, it's not just that it belongs in the 20th century, it belongs in the 19th century. I mean, the system was set up to suit 19th century men. It's so out of date and so ridiculous in so many ways that and yet people do, for all me saying, oh, there's a lot of people want change, of course, then you turn on the news and see what's going on in the cricket world and you realise, God, there's
that was on my mind earlier. Yeah,
so many people around who just want to cling to just horrible ideas. So, so much work still to do.
Yeah, loads. Adrian, I just wondered if you wanted to step in here and respond.
Yes, it probably does stem from the 19th century, if not even before that. And alongside the work that we can do in helping people understand the common realities for those who are not the dominant, and to first drive engagement with conversations before even any kind of behavioural changes, the other work needs to go on alongside that. Yeah. So for sure, when we look at the leaders who often are the dominant and can set the culture, still suffer from those basic psychological defense mechanisms that human beings have evolved with, and they're not aware of how they come to play. So Mark used that phrase, they're still clinging on to power, they're clinging on to things, and that sense of all this whatever you want to call it, diversity, inclusion, all this stuff is just a threat to me. Even though I understand it's a threat to me, and it kicks off the threat mechanisms. Are any of you familiar with David Rock's scarf model? Yeah, and you do feel that kicks off with many of people in positions of power when they're faced with this opportunity. I'm going to use that word opportunity to make the team, the organisation, the society a bit better. But it's not necessarily seen as that. Initially, it's seen as a threat. And Mark, you've said this phrase to me when we've talked about it. My pie is about to get smaller. That's what they see. I've had even white colleagues say to me, well, gosh, any white guy over the age of 40, well, their career's ended, isn't it?
I'm history.
I'm history. So they're seen as a threat. Even that initial visceral response puts up those initial barriers. And Mark, you said, it's interesting, that stat of 46% of people are, again, just somehow trying to survive, but again, feel there's too much threat to say anything or come out of that shell to say, well, actually, I don't like this environment either.
And I think they will be more and more ready to speak up as they see people around them speaking up.
The cricket is an interesting thing. I grew up playing cricket, from a West Indian heritage. Cricket was in my blood. I would always say throughout my entire career of playing cricket since the age of 6, in anything outside of my family, there was a sense of not belonging at all. Not belonging. I would say that I was the young black kid in a white grammar school. The only thing I could do would be bowl, because you're the black kid from the West Indies, aren't you? You're a bowler. Career being, look, I was fortunate enough to play with the wonderful Nasser Hussain, and he did well to thrive, bearing in mind he was from Indian heritage. But you look around, cricket is loved by the black community. How many black players really got through to the England elite squads? Very little. And there's always a strong sense of you're on the outside and you do not belong in the institution that is very British, that's known as cricket. And now it's beginning to come out. Yet you saw that even when the initial complaints came out, that the cricketer in question was offered £105,000 to stay quiet, not to actually change things, to stay quiet.
And that even after the last 20 months, the Yorkshire Cricket Club said publicly, oh, it was banter. I mean, even after the last 20 months, they thought, not just that they thought that, but they thought they could say that publicly and that would be an end to it. We need a nationwide education program to explain to people the difference between banter and bullying.
Well, I couldn't agree more.
Mark, that's my point. The point is, there is a strong need for an education program on many levels, which I guess, Stacie, starts with those conversations rather than formal education. It just starts with just conversations to open up the eyes of those in positions of power.
Well, if we're talking about education, it starts much earlier, right? Education needs to start in primary school. So I told this story while I was celebrating my birthday and everyone laughed. When I was very young, I still lived in the US, and Ronald McDonald came to my school. and I still remember Ronald McDonald came to my school and he talked to us. I must have been in 4th or 5th grade. Mm-hmm. And he explained that when we brush our teeth, we need to turn the water off while we're actually brushing our teeth. So we put our toothbrush under the water and we turn it off, we brush our teeth, then we turn it back on and rinse. Now that sounds like, of course you do that. When I heard it, I said, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. That's not what I do today. I let the water run while I brush my teeth. And I stopped immediately. It had such an impression on me. He said a lot of things, and there's some other great examples, but that's the one that immediately I got. Of course I can save water and turn off the water while I'm actually brushing my teeth. And it didn't feel like he was imposing something on me. There was no mention of the environment or green, or it was just, this is how you can save water. And it stuck. And I know from friends who grew up with me, they remember Ronald McDonald coming too, and they remember other things more vividly than that particular tip, like littering, why we shouldn't litter, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's an opportunity, when we talk about education, I think sometimes we see that too narrowly. I'm not saying that you did, Adrian, but sometimes it's seen too narrowly around what education looks like. But young people, really young people, they're like sponges. So they can either absorb the negative and it becomes theirs, or they can absorb a very rich and diverse learning environment that offers them different points of views, right? So I think that's one thing. And I just want to speak really quickly to something else that's been coming up in the conversation, which is the scarcity mindset. Oppression is built on scarcity. So, of course, people are concerned with where they stand at the end of this whole change thing, because that's what it's built on. So how do we move people? I think the fundamental question is not so much equity versus equality. It's how do we move people? And I have to admit, my first degree is in economics, so maybe I see it a little differently. But I do think we have to support people in moving out of a scarcity mindset. The world and the earth and its riches are abundant, but we have not treated the earth very well. And we see that, right? We see that very clearly when it comes to climate change, but we also see that in the suffering that is dense in certain parts of the world and less dense in others. And the so-called richest nation on earth has a lot of suffering in particular parts where it's very dense. And unfortunately, that density aligns with particular social identities. And so in the US, for example, we know that working class white people will still vote for things that are not in their best interests if they believe that it will keep Black populations and people of color populations down. Scarcity mindset.
Stacie, do you believe the scarcity mindset is driven by the dominance, or does it just happen to be naturally prevalent?
I think the manifestation of it, the way it expresses itself, is not inherent. I do think, of course, there's a sense of survival, but the way humans have changed that is dramatic. So again, just to make a different example, so people, maybe something that's less sensitive, there's a researcher who worked really diligently against every naysayer to show that trees do not dominate each other. They don't fight for the soil or take from each other. The researcher actually found that trees are a network. And when more of them thrive, the network grows. But it used to be believed in science, and people thought, this researcher was kind of a whack job, if you will. And I would never use that language, but that's how they described it. It used to be believed that that is completely false. Trees, the roots are fighting underneath the soil. We can't see it, but they're fighting. And actually they're not. They're communicating in order to create this network that thrives. So I do believe, of course, there is a natural desire to survive, but I don't believe that natural desire has to lead to dominance.
Stacie, thank you. And I think we're just about to run out of time, but I think that's a great place to leave it with that trees metaphor picture in our heads. Well, thank you, team. It's been a hugely interesting conversation. So thanks to Mark Edwards, Adrian Green and Stacie Graham. And I suspect there's some people listening that would be interested in connecting with you guys. So could we just finish by you telling everybody how people could connect with you? So, Mark, how can people connect with you?
Well, you can contact me through the website, which is softskillshardtimes.com, or find me on LinkedIn.
Fabulous. Thanks, Mark. Adrian?
Yeah, likewise, you can find me at pressure-points.com, or again, find me at LinkedIn.
Fab. And Stacie?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Stacie C.C. Graham, Stacie with an I-E, and my website is staciecgraham.com.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, it's been a total pleasure. Thoroughly enjoyed my afternoon talking to you guys, and hopefully our paths will cross at some point shortly. So take care, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
So thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I've been Alex Morgan. Our purpose is to inspire and champion coaching excellence to advance the coaching profession and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and in turn society. If you'd like to find out more, please follow us on LinkedIn and explore our webpage at theassociationforcoaching.com. There you can keep up to date with our latest episodes and conversations, as well as our digital learning calendar.